The American Egyptian Women of Influence podcast aims to be the American Egyptian culture podcast of choice. We believe that our knowledge and our participants' stories will greatly enhance understanding of both cultures. I'm Karen Leggett Aburaya. Sherine Hamdy is a medical anthropologist who also studies bioethics, science, and technology in the Middle East. She was born in the United States and grew up all over the world, the daughter of Egyptian parents. Sherine taught for many years at Brown University and now is professor of anthropology at the University of California, Irvine. Dr. Hamdy is the author of Our Bodies Belong to God, Organ Transplants, Islam, and the Struggle for Human Dignity in Egypt. She's received numerous awards and fellowships for her work, but today our focus is on one of her most original collaborations with co-author Coleman Nye, Lessa, a story of friendship, medical promise, and revolution in an anthropological graphic novel. Welcome, Sherine. Very glad to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's take a few steps back. Why did you become an anthropologist, and how does medical anthropology differ from any other kind?
Well, I think my biography of having grown up in so many different places around the world, Haiti and Mali and Mexico and Guatemala, and then summers in Egypt had me primed for cross-cultural interests. And I was very interested in women's health and reproductive issues in the 90s. That's when I was in college. And so medical anthropology was the perfect blend of those two things.
Now, your co-author, Coleman Nye, joined her cancer research to your understanding of kidney failure and organ transplants to create this story about two friends in Egypt. Layla, the poor daughter of a Bawab, who was the super or doorman in a building in Cairo, and that building is the home to the well-off American family of Anna. And later in their adult lives, Layla's father needs a kidney transplant, and Anna learns she carries a gene that predisposes her to breast cancer. And their story is told with comics drawn by two students from the Rhode Island School of Design. What is the point of their story in a book called Lissa, which in familiar Arabic means not yet, wait a minute?
Right. So Coleman was started out as my PhD student at Brown, and we were both drawn to this field of critical medical anthropology, which means looking at political economy, the unequal distribution of resources that result in an unequal distribution of health in a population. And so in the process of working on the organ donation debate in Egypt, I came across a almost silent epidemic of kidney failure and liver failure in Egypt that people knew about but weren't really speaking about in terms of it having precise causes. It just seemed like this was coming out of nowhere, and people speculated that it had to do with environmental pollution or toxicants, or it could be different aspects of the food. People talked about wheat, for example, and how it grows a certain types of aflatoxins or ochratoxins in the storage process. There's just multiple. We find that in situations where a disease suddenly becomes very visible and apparent, people develop multiple etiologies as the science is catching up. So now we know that with COVID, of course. So that part really interested me. And what I was particularly drawn to were patients' responses that, it's not just me it's not just a situation of me. And the reason why that was so important was because the solution to having kidney failure or liver failure medically would be to get a new kidney or a new liver. And that requires enrolling a whole other person into your disease or problem. And maybe that would make sense if you thought that the disease was very specific to you. Like I am the one person in my family who has this because of genetics or whatever reason. And then maybe it's thinkable to accept a kidney donation from your brother or something, or from your father. But in this particular circumstance, because there was so much concern that this was a much larger problem that had to do with environmental contaminants, pollution, the corrupt government, medical mismanagement, it was more like this feeling that anybody could get kidney failure or liver failure at any time. And so why would I subject my healthy family member to something? Everybody's going to need all their organs. I can't leave him in the same environment that made me sick when I had two kidneys and then leave him in the same environment with one. And that's, perfectly rational and a reasonable response once you understand that that's how people are thinking it through. That was, what was happening in Egypt. And in the United States, over the years, we've seen a very disturbing increase in cancer. And cancer is similarly almost, we could call it an epidemic. 1 in 2 Americans will have a cancer diagnosis in her lifetime. And so we were talking through our examples and we thought, wouldn't it be great to bring these two field sites together somehow and show the frictions, but also the connections between the two?
Now, why did you choose that? Those are incredibly heavy, serious topics, socially and academically. Why did you choose comics as the way to convey that?
Well, so that's part of the why is on the one hand, comics allows us to lighten some otherwise just very heavy and difficult material. And I think if you look through the pages of Lissa, there's this one particular spread that's so hard it was hard on the illustrators to even illustrate it. But, when Anna's losing her mother to cancer, there's some very difficult, heart-wrenching scenes of what that looks like, the long demise of the cancer patient. And comics somehow renders that more palatable, more digestible. It without sanitizing it or minimizing it. The opposite happens. It gives you just enough stripped down information that you lean in so that you can see what's happening next. So that was one aspect of the comic. And what we wanted to show is that actually you can use comics illustrations to add complexity to issues, to take these already very complex issues and complexify them even more by playing with things like scale. The scale, what does it look like if I look at the scale of the cell versus the scale of the organ versus the scale of the human versus the scale of family versus the scale of society versus the scale of the global economy? So comics allows you to play with what's there, what isn't there, by showing you different things, by showing how language sometimes refers to something that's not immediately apparent with text alone. There's so many different advantages to the comic, and the collaborative aspect was also exciting for me, being able to picture the Egyptian revolution and all the visual culture that emanated from that, including the graffiti that became very kind of popular and memorialized in the city. And comics is also a way to say, document, to say this happened at a time when the revolution was being actively erased.
You bring up the revolution, and I wanted to ask you that's really in one sense it's unrelated to the anthropological arguments and the medical information that you're conveying. Why did you decide to set this at that particular time and include the whole graphic novel could have been written without the revolution at all?
Well, part of our argument was about how we'll never be able to address illness or disease adequately if we continue to think in this individualized frame. And we have to think more broadly in terms of the political economy, because that's the only way we can even get a handle on something like cancer. And so we have to, rethink somehow these scales, and the context of the revolution made that very apparent, that health is absolutely a political issue. And the revolutionaries did that work for us because they were on the streets and they were shouting, we want health, we want bread, we want freedom, we want social equality as a health intervention as well.
And what about the reaction to this? The Lancet, the British medical journal, noted that this graphic novel shows the huge and still untapped potential of comics for use in medicine and global health. But what has been the reaction to Lissa, both in the academic and professional community, as well as students in the lay community?
It's been overwhelmingly positive. I've been really pleased by that. And I think the other advantage of comics is that people can enter at all different levels. So people don't feel turned off if they don't already have an exposure to public health or medical anthropology, or if they don't know anything about the revolution. There's something that's just very humble about the medium of comics that anybody can relate to immediately, and it brings people in at all different levels. And people have used this in PhD programs, but they've also used it in high school. And so that's been very exciting for me, and I really want to continue to think about how comics can widen and broaden audiences so that we're not just academics writing to each other in these journals that nobody reads, right?
Well, thank you very much. We're going to stop there, and I know you have more books coming, and we'll make sure that people have the websites and information to find them. Thank you very much, Sherine Hamdy.
Thank you.